You know, I've generally regarded myself as a rather fair-minded individual. I appreciate my tranquility. I adhere to regulations. I settle my tax obligations. The complete package. Consequently, when I acquired a humble little property in a purportedly high-end HOA community, I anticipated everything would be straightforward, a sanctuary for relaxation, perhaps a touch of gardening, and enjoying the impeccably kept lawns for which I was paying a considerable amount. What I hadn't anticipated was a suburban autocrat otherwise known as Karen, our revered HOA president. And I most certainly didn't imagine a time when I'd be computing the total acquisition cost of an entire residential area merely to prove a point. But then life is full of unexpected turns, isn't it? This story, well, it's quite remarkable. It all commenced, as these situations frequently do, with something entirely preposterous: my vehicles. I possess two. A practical sedan for everyday commuting and an older, classic pickup truck I've been in the process of restoring. Both were consistently parked tidily in my driveway or, in the instance of the pickup when I was actively engaged with it, inside my garage. Never on the public road, never obstructing anything, never an unsightly object, unless, of course, you deem a lovingly preserved piece of automotive heritage an eyesore, which Karen apparently did. The initial notification was civil enough in that characteristically passive-aggressive HOA manner. A small piece of paper referencing some vague bylaw concerning vehicle aesthetics and the preservation of community standards. It subtly implied that having project vehicles visible was discouraged, even if the aforementioned project vehicle was, at that juncture, primarily concealed beneath a cover in my own driveway while I awaited a specific component. I chuckled, crumpled the notice, and ensured the cover was especially well secured. I assumed it was merely a customary, overly enthusiastic welcome to the neighborhood gesture. Heavens, was I mistaken. A week thereafter, another notification arrived. This one adopted a sterner tone, alluding to potential fines. And it specifically mentioned excessive vehicles. Now, I'm no mathematical genius, but 2 vehicles for a single-family home didn't seem excessive to me, particularly when considering Karen, our HOA president, who resided 3 houses away in a dwelling that resembled a McMansion crossbred with a wedding cake, frequently had 3 vehicles parked in her expansive driveway. There was the gleaming white Escalade, its vanity plates proclaiming Karen 1. Understated, I'm aware. Her husband's equally ostentatious muscle car, which he only revved on weekends, and what appeared to be a permanently stationed luxury sedan for, I can only imagine, chauffeuring her prize-winning poodle. The duplicity was so flagrant it was nearly comical. Nearly. I concluded that a calm, logical discussion was necessary. I intercepted Karen during one of her neighborhood surveillance rounds, during which she would glide along the street in her Escalade, windows tinted, occasionally decelerating to squint disapprovingly at a stray dandelion or a child's bicycle momentarily left unattended. I politely signaled her to stop. She lowered her window approximately 3 inches, looking at me over the rim of enormous sunglasses that likely cost more than my monthly food budget. Yes, she inquired, her voice imbued with a sort of weary disdain typically reserved for telemarketers. I elucidated the matter of the notices, pointed out that I only possessed 2 vehicles, both correctly parked, and then, perhaps unwisely, gestured toward her own driveway. I mean, I said, endeavoring to maintain a light tone, I observe you have 3 vehicles and I wasn't aware of any 2-car restriction per household. That was an error. Her impeccably shaped eyebrows arched upwards. The sunglasses slid a fraction down her nose, exposing eyes that could solidify lava. My vehicles, she articulated as if addressing an exceptionally slow-witted child, are suitable for the prestige of this community. Yours are questionable. And the rules, Mr. Henderson, are for individuals who require them. She then proceeded to deliver a monologue on how the HOA was committed to upholding property values and a certain standard, and how my accumulation of vehicles was not conducive to that. An accumulation of 2. I attempted to reason with her, to highlight the actual phrasing of the bylaws I had since reviewed, which were ambiguous at best and certainly did not stipulate a definite number or type beyond basic operational and non-commercial usage. She was unreceptive. The window ascended smoothly, a silent rebuff. The fine materialized a few days subsequently: $100 for excessive vehicle count and unapproved vehicle type. I remitted it simply to prevent immediate further complications, but the unfairness of it consumed me. This wasn't about regulations, it was about dominance. Karen had resolved that she disliked my cars, or perhaps just me, and she intended to wield the HOA as her personal cudgel. I am a man of patience, But I also possess a profound distaste for bullies and the arbitrary exercise of power. My professional history, you see, is not in horticulture or peaceful retirement. I dedicated 20 years to corporate finance with a focus on acquisitions and, shall we say, hostile restructurings. I was adept at interpreting a balance sheet, a contract, and, more significantly, people. And Karen, with her inexpensive fragrance and costly insecurities, was an easily deciphered book, printed in very large, very irritating type. This was not going to conclude with a $100 penalty. This was merely the initial volley in a conflict I had not sought, but one I was progressively ready to engage in and secure victory. Little did she realize, her trivial vendetta concerning my two entirely legitimate vehicles was about to trigger a sequence of events that would cause her regal domain to disintegrate. The mere notion, even then, elicited a faint, grim smile. She was about to discover that Mr. Henderson was considerably more than just the quiet resident with the vintage pickup truck. The fines continued to arrive with metronomic regularity. Initially, it was another $100 for the cars. Then, $50 because my grass was purportedly a quarter-inch too tall the day prior to the scheduled landscaping service. Following that, a truly Kafkaesque $75 for improperly stored refuse containers, because I had the audacity to place my bins out at 7 p.m. the evening before collection, instead of the apparently divinely sanctioned hour of 6 a.m. on collection day itself. Each citation was accompanied by a self-satisfied little note, frequently handwritten by Karen herself, replete with passive-aggressive declarations about community responsibility. I documented everything with painstaking care. Every notice, every check I issued for these absurd fines. Every photograph I captured of Karen's own infractions. Her 3 vehicles perpetually on display like trophies, her sometimes overflowing trash cans, telltale signs of a lifestyle that didn't always align with her strict pronouncements, the slightly showy holiday decorations she kept displayed well into February. I even commenced taking time-stamped photographs of my own lawn immediately after the landscapers departed, merely to possess evidence against the inevitable grass-too-high ticket. It was draining and, frankly, demeaning. I attempted to attend an HOA meeting. It was convened in the small clubhouse, a structure that reeked of stale coffee and Karen's overpowering perfume. The board comprised Karen, naturally, appearing like a petty tyrant on her slightly raised chair, and 2 other individuals whom I privately dubbed Nodder and Shrugger. Nodder was a man with a nervous demeanor who concurred with everything Karen uttered, his head bobbing like a dashboard ornament. Shrugger was a woman who seemed perpetually perplexed, offering non-committal shrugs whenever a challenging question surfaced, which was infrequent, as Karen monopolized the proceedings. When I endeavored to address the matter of the vehicle fines and the inconsistent enforcement, Karen interrupted me mid-speech. "Mr. Henderson," she warbled, a cloying smile fixed on her face that failed to reach her cold eyes. "We have previously discussed your specific situation. The board's determination is conclusive. We have numerous significant community affairs to address." Nodder nodded with great energy. Shrugger shrugged. A handful of other residents shifted uneasily in their seats, but no one voiced dissent. It was evident Karen had fostered an environment of either intimidation or indifference. Perhaps both. I was not simply going to capitulate. My subsequent action was to seek advice from an old associate, a lawyer named Ben, who specialized in contract law and, as fortune would have it, had experience with a few particularly contentious HOA disagreements during his career. I detailed the circumstances, presented him with my documentation, the photographs, and the bylaws. Ben listened with forbearance, occasionally emitting a soft whistle. "Classic HOA overreach," he remarked, reclining in his chair. "This Karen sounds like quite a character. You can contest these fines individually, perhaps win some, lose some. It will be a protracted, exhausting endeavor." Or, he paused, a spark in his eye, or you could examine the broader context. He clarified that HOAs, while influential within their designated authority, were nonetheless constrained by their own foundational documents and state legislation. He proposed a thorough examination of the HOA's incorporation papers, the covenants, conditions, and restrictions, CC and RS, and, critically, the land proprietorship records for the entire development. Sometimes, Ben stated, these communities are structured in ways that are not immediately apparent. You might discover leverage where you least anticipate it. That is when the cogs in my old financial mind truly began to whir. Leverage. That was a concept I comprehended. I expressed my gratitude to Ben, paid his consultation charge, and proceeded directly to the county records depository. I devoted the subsequent 2 weeks immersed in antiquated deed ledgers, plat schematics, and incorporation documents. It was laborious, meticulous work interpreting legalese and tracing chains of ownership. The majority of it was conventional material, but then I located it. The proverbial golden ticket. The entire development, Willow Creek Estates, as it was so ostentatiously designated, did not consist of fee-simple properties where homeowners possessed their house and the land it occupies. No, the homeowners possessed their physical edifices, the houses themselves, but the land, all of it, every individual parcel, every blade of grass in the communal areas was subject to a 99-year master land lease. And that master lease was controlled by a solitary, rather inconspicuous corporation, Willow Creek Holdings LLC, which, based on further investigation, was established by the original developer decades prior and now appeared to be administered by a remote, out-of-state trust company that likely regarded it as just another entry in an extensive portfolio. The HOA, Karen's diminutive dominion, was, in essence, a subsidiary entity engaged by Willow Creek Holdings to oversee the daily functions and enforce the community regulations on behalf of the landowners, the actual landowners. Abruptly, Karen's authority seemed considerably less than total. She was a monarch indeed, but a monarch governing a leased fortress. And she was unaware of her true landlord's identity. The ramifications struck me with the force of a physical blow. If an individual or entity controlled Willow Creek Holdings LLC, they controlled the land. They controlled everything. They were, in practical terms, the ultimate HOA. A highly intriguing, exceedingly costly, but immensely tempting notion began to crystallize in my thoughts. What if I became the landlord? The idea was audacious, almost comically so. Acquiring an entire neighborhood's underlying land merely to address a petty HOA despot. It seemed like something from a film. Yet, the more I contemplated it, the more achievable it appeared, particularly considering my professional expertise. I wasn't merely some aggrieved homeowner. I was an individual who had dedicated a career to managing intricate financial transactions, appraising value, and carrying out large-scale acquisitions. This was no longer solely about retribution, though the image of Karen's expression upon discovering the truth was undeniably a motivating element. It was about resolving a problem in the most conclusive manner conceivable. It was also, I acknowledged with a clinical objectivity, potentially a sound, if unorthodox, investment if managed prudently. The neighborhood was well located. The houses themselves were generally well kept, notwithstanding Karen's reign. The existing land lease agreement, from what I could determine, was likely undervalued considering current market rates in the vicinity. My initial move was to discreetly investigate Willow Creek Holdings LLC. This required some effort. The trust company overseeing it was deliberately inscrutable, as such entities frequently are. However, I possessed resources, contacts from my former professional life. I hired a private investigator, an individual I had previously employed for due diligence in corporate transactions, a quiet professional named Marcus who specialized in unraveling complex ownership arrangements. Marcus proved to be worth every cent. Within a week, he had procured a name, a direct contact for the individual at the trust company responsible for managing the Willow Creek Holdings asset. This turned out to be a rather apathetic portfolio manager named Mr. Abernathy, situated in an entirely different state, who, according to Marcus's concise report, seemed more preoccupied with his golf handicap than with a relatively minor land lease in a town he had likely never visited. This was auspicious. Indifference often signified a readiness to divest if the price was suitable and the inconvenience minimal. Next, I needed to comprehend the precise terms of the land leases for the individual homeowners. I succeeded in acquiring a copy of a standard lease agreement from a neighbor, Mrs. Gable, an elderly widow who was among the original residents. She, too, had fallen afoul of Karen, something concerning unapproved garden gnomes, and was surprisingly amenable to sharing her documents once I explained I was examining the HOA's broader legal foundation. The lease provisions were lengthy, 99 years, as I had noted, with clauses for renewal, but crucially, they were leases. The homeowners owned the improvements, their houses, but paid ground rent for the land. The HOA was the designated agent for collecting this ground rent and administering the covenants on behalf of Willow Creek Holdings. This arrangement, while not unprecedented, is less prevalent nowadays and frequently results in complications as leases mature or property values diverge from ground rent schedules. Excellent. Complications were my area of expertise. I then commenced a quiet assessment of the total value of the underlying land for the entirety of Willow Creek Estates. This entailed examining comparable land sales, zoning ordinances, and the potential for future development or redevelopment. Although my immediate intention was not necessarily to demolish the place, I required a solid figure to formulate an offer. I also initiated the establishment of a new, anonymous LLC, let's refer to it as Serene Valley Properties LLC, through which I would conduct the acquisition if it materialized. Anonymity was paramount at this juncture. I did not want Karen or anyone else in the HOA to get an inkling of my contemplations. The image of her countenance, should this plan come to fruition, served as a potent incentive, a small mental screensaver of prospective contentment. The most challenging aspect was initiating communication with Mr. Abernathy at the trust company without triggering suspicion. I couldn't simply telephone and declare, "Hello, I'm an unhappy resident seeking to purchase your entire neighborhood from under our HOA president." Therefore, I had my attorney make the preliminary contact. Lawyers conversing with trust managers is a frequent occurrence. Ben presented it as an inquiry from an investment group, Serene Valley Properties LLC. Naturally interested in long-term land lease portfolios. There was no mention of Willow Creek Estates specifically at first, merely a general indication of interest. Mr. Abernathy, consistent with Marcus's evaluation, was initially unenthusiastic. His trust managed numerous such assets. However, Ben was tenacious, gently guiding the conversation over several calls towards smaller, perhaps underperforming or administratively cumbersome assets. Eventually, Willow Creek Holdings LLC surfaced. Abernathy confirmed its inclusion in their portfolio. Ben expressed polite interest. The initial connection was established. The stillness before the ensuing turmoil was almost tangible. Karen persisted in her petty despotism, finding someone for a slightly faded shingle, another for excessive bird feeder usage. She had no comprehension that the ground beneath her impeccably maintained realm was quite literally on the verge of shifting, and I was the one instigating the tremor. The negotiation for Willow Creek Holdings LLC was an exemplary display of patience and finesse, largely directed by Ben, with me providing him with instructions and financial projections from the background. Mr. Abernathy, representing the trust, was predictably circumspect. These established trusts are averse to abrupt changes. They favor the gradual, steady passage of time or, failing that, a clean, straightforward departure. Our tactic was to portray Serene Valley Properties LLC as a no-nonsense, professional investment firm seeking to acquire a portfolio of land lease assets, with Willow Creek being one of several potential candidates. We never revealed that Willow Creek was our principal objective. We made it evident that we were prepared for a swift, all-cash transaction, provided the due diligence was satisfactory and the price was equitable. Cash and celerity are often compelling arguments when engaging with entities eager to streamline their holdings. The due diligence phase was rigorous. I personally scrutinized every document pertaining to Willow Creek Holdings, the original land grants, the master lease agreement, the financial statements, which were surprisingly sparse, mostly comprising ground rent income less some basic administrative charges, and the agreement with the Willow Creek Estates HOA. This is where my financial acumen truly proved invaluable. I discerned that the ground rents had not been substantially adjusted in years and were likely below market rate, indicating upside potential for a new proprietor. More critically, for my immediate objectives, the master agreement with the HOA was surprisingly lax. It conferred broad authority upon the HOA to manage the community and enforce covenants, but it also included provisions permitting the landowner, Willow Creek Holdings, to terminate the management agreement with valid cause or, more simply, not to renew it upon its expiration, which was conveniently only 2 years distant. Even more advantageous, there were stipulations allowing the landowner to directly appoint board members to the HOA if certain conditions of mismanagement or financial instability were fulfilled, conditions that, with Karen in charge, might not be overly difficult to subtly contrive or at least contend. While these larger machinations were in progress, I also initiated a secondary, much more discreet operation, acquiring the actual houses, the improvements, from any willing sellers within Willow Creek Estates. This was a more extended strategy, but it fulfilled multiple objectives. Firstly, it would grant me direct authority over individual properties, bolstering my ultimate standing. Secondly, it would enable me to extricate these properties from Karen's sphere of influence if I opted to rent them out under different conditions or even leave them temporarily unoccupied. Thirdly, every house I purchased signified one fewer voting member indebted to Karen in any subsequent HOA disputes, although my ultimate scheme aimed to circumvent the conventional HOA power structure entirely. I utilized a different LLC for these acquisitions, let's designate it Neighborhood Renewal Group, again to preserve anonymity. I focused on properties that entered the market organically and also extended discreet, above-market offers to a few residents I knew were dissatisfied with Karen's administration or were seeking to relocate for other reasons. Mrs. Gable, the gnome aficionado, was among the first to sell to me. She was overjoyed, taking her gnomes and a respectable profit to a smaller, HOA-free cottage across town. "Give that Karen hell, dear," she had remarked with a wink as she relinquished the keys. Each successful house acquisition was a minor triumph, a stone dislodged from Karen's stronghold. I ensured the transactions were managed through an intermediary real estate agent renowned for discretion, so my name never surfaced directly. The funds were transferred from Neighborhood Renewal Group's accounts, which were, of course, financed by me but structured to be obscure. Karen, in the meantime, remained delightfully oblivious to the seismic shifts occurring beneath her. She was excessively occupied. I heard she had launched a campaign to standardize mailbox colors, a truly vital matter, and was convening emergency HOA meetings to deliberate the urgent crisis of unapproved petunias in someone's flowerbed. The sheer triviality was astonishing, but it served to divert her attention. She probably observed that a few houses were selling but likely ascribed it to typical market fluctuations. She might have even been gratified, envisioning new, submissive residents moving in, eager to adhere to her every directive. The negotiations with Mr. Abernathy for Willow Creek Holdings extended for nearly 6 months. There were offers, counteroffers, and unending requests for additional documentation from their end, all standard corporate courtship rituals. Ben managed most of the direct interactions, his composed, lawyerly presence a perfect counterbalance to my barely contained anticipation. Finally, we arrived at an accord. The price was considerable, a significant outlay, but one I had meticulously calculated. It represented fair market value for the land asset, perhaps even slightly advantageous to me, given the locked-in, below-market ground rents that I knew I could eventually revise. The day the purchase agreement for Willow Creek Holdings LLC was executed by both parties, contingent on final closure, was an uneventful one for me. No jubilations, no triumphant gestures, just a profound, cool sense of fulfillment. The most significant piece of the puzzle was now slotting into position. Karen's sovereignty as Queen of Willow Creek Estates was operating on borrowed time. She simply hadn't realized it yet. The ground beneath her Escalade-polished throne was on the verge of becoming mine. The closing on Willow Creek Holdings LLC was an anticlimax. A flurry of signatures and wire transfers managed by lawyers and escrow agents. One moment, the trust company possessed the land, the next, Serene Valley Properties LLC, my LLC, possessed it. I was now, effectively, the proprietor of the entire Willow Creek Estates. Every homeowner, Karen included, was now technically my lessee, at least for the ground beneath their houses. The balance of power had fundamentally, irrevocably altered. For several weeks, I took no action. I allowed the ink to dry, both literally and metaphorically. I wanted to confirm all legal filings were finalized, all I's dotted and T's crossed. Meanwhile, Neighborhood Renewal Group persisted in its quiet acquisition of individual houses. By this stage, I owned 7 properties outright within the development, in addition to the master land lease for all of them. These 7 houses were now, in a way, doubly mine. Karen, naturally, remained unaware. Her attention stayed fixed on her micro-tyranny. I received another fine, this time for improperly pruned shrubbery, a novel one. I nearly framed it. It was a testament to her devotion to the absurd. The HOA's regular monthly meeting was imminent, and I resolved that this would be the ideal setting for the grand unveiling. I no longer needed to depose her through votes. I owned the entire game board. Yet, there was a certain dramatic flair to confronting her in her own center of authority that resonated with my sense of fairness. A few days prior to the meeting, I had Ben prepare a formal letter. It was addressed to the Willow Creek Estates HOA Board of Directors, specifically to Karen as president. The letter was straightforward. It declared the change in ownership of Willow Creek Holdings LLC, the master landowner, to Serene Valley Properties LLC. It further asserted that, as the new landowner, Serene Valley Properties LLC was exercising its rights under the master agreement to review the current HOA management contract and, more immediately, to appoint a representative to the HOA board. That representative, the letter concluded, would be me, Mr. Henderson. The letter was dispatched via registered mail, return receipt requested, time to arrive the day before the HOA meeting. I envisioned Karen's expression as she signed for it, perhaps anticipating another resident's grievance or a vendor's bill. The notion was delightful. On the evening of the HOA meeting, I arrived a few minutes late, intentionally. The small clubhouse was moderately occupied. Karen was at her customary vantage point, flanked by Nodder and Shrugger. She was mid-sentence, discussing with great solemnity the critical issue of holiday decoration schedules. She paused as I entered, a flash of irritation crossing her features at the interruption. "Mr. Henderson," she stated, her voice taut. "You're tardy. We're discussing the Christmas light policy." I observed the registered mail envelope on the table before her, unopened. "Perfect. Actually, Karen," I said, my voice composed and distinct, cutting through the room, "I believe there's a more urgent matter for the agenda. Perhaps you should open your correspondence." All eyes shifted to her. She glanced down at the envelope, then back at me, a perplexed frown on her face. Nodder appeared anxious. Shrugger seemed, well, more shruggish than usual. Gradually, Karen retrieved the envelope and tore it open. Her eyes scanned the initial few lines. I observed as the color drained from her face. The self-satisfaction, the imperial assurance, it all simply vanished. She reread it, her lips moving silently. The room was utterly still. One could have heard a pin drop or perhaps the faint rustle of a poorly pruned shrub shedding a leaf in defiance. This cannot be accurate," she stammered, looking up at me, her voice scarcely a whisper. "What is this?" "It's quite simple, Karen," I responded, stepping forward. "It's a notification that the land your house occupies, the land all these houses occupy, has a new owner. That owner is a company I control. And as the representative of that company, pursuant to the master agreement you appear to have disregarded in your fervent enforcement of petunia placement, I am now a de facto member of this board. In fact, I allowed a faint smile to touch my lips, given that I own the very ground we're standing on and also now possess 7 voting properties within this association. I believe that renders me the majority stakeholder by several different measures. So, yes, we can deliberate on Christmas lights, or we could address the future of this HOA's management. Your decision." The silence that ensued was profound. Karen merely stared, speechless, the letter quivering in her hand. Nodder looked as if he were about to collapse. Shrugger, for the first time, actually appeared intrigued. The game had altered. Checkmate. The aftermath of that HOA meeting was, to describe it conservatively, tumultuous for Karen, deeply gratifying for me, and a blend of shock, disbelief, and, for some, quiet relief for the other residents. Karen, following her initial stunned silence, attempted to bluster. "This is preposterous. You can't just acquire the neighborhood," she sputtered, her face flushing a rather unbecoming shade of puce that clashed dreadfully with her expensive turquoise tracksuit. "Actually, Karen," I replied, my voice remaining infuriatingly composed to her, "I can, and I did. Or rather, my company purchased the master land lease, which, for all practical purposes, means I control the land. And as for the houses, well, Neighborhood Renewal Group has been quite active in the market recently. I believe we own, let's see," I made a gesture of counting on my fingers. Yes, 7 properties now. Soon to be 8. That grants me considerable voting power too, wouldn't you agree?" Nodder just kept shaking his head, murmuring, "Unbelievable. Just unbelievable." Shrugger, bless her heart, actually spoke up. "Well, it certainly clarifies the increase in sales." Karen shot her a poisonous look, which Shrugger met with a surprisingly defiant shrug. The other residents were conversing in low tones amongst themselves. A few appeared frightened, a few seemed angry, but a surprising number looked hopeful. I addressed the room. "Let me be explicit," I stated. "My principal objection was never with the notion of an HOA or with sensible community standards. My objection was with the arbitrary and unjust application of rules, with the misuse of authority, and with a distinct absence of common sense and propriety." I looked directly at Karen. "This HOA, under its current leadership, has evolved into an instrument for personal vendettas and petty tyranny. That concludes this evening. My first official action, utilizing the authority vested in Serene Valley Properties LLC as the landowner, was to call for an immediate vote of no confidence in Karen as president and in Nodder as treasurer. He also predictably managed the finances with the same lack of diligence he applied to Karen's edicts. With my 7 property votes, augmented by a few other discontented residents who now felt empowered to raise their hands, the motion passed by an overwhelming majority. Karen was initially speechless, then enraged. "You can't do this. I'll sue. I'll contact my lawyer," she shrieked. "Please proceed," I said. "I'm certain Ben, my lawyer, would be pleased to speak with him." He's quite well versed in the complexities of land lease agreements and HOA governance. Ben, who had discreetly entered and was positioned at the rear of the room, gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. The subsequent step involved non-renewals, though it wasn't quite as drastic as immediately evicting them. As the landowner, Serene Valley Properties LLC possessed the right not to renew the individual ground leases upon their natural expiration or, in instances of clear and persistent breaches of covenant, which Karen herself had been perpetrating with her selective enforcement and potential mismanagement, to terminate them with appropriate legal notification. For most residents, I had no such intention. My objective was reform, not widespread displacement. I promptly announced that Serene Valley Properties would endeavor to install a new, equitable, and transparent HOA board and that we would be reevaluating all current bylaws for reasonableness. The oppressive fines would be discontinued. The emphasis would shift to genuine community welfare, not the hue of mailboxes. For Karen, her husband, and her two closest associates on the board, Nodder and one other particularly loathsome sycophant who typically contrived to miss meetings but consistently voted Karen's way via proxy, it was a different scenario. Their ground leases, I ascertained through a comprehensive review, contained clauses pertaining to maintaining community harmony and acting in good faith as representatives of the HOA, which their conduct had flagrantly breached. More straightforwardly, their leases, like all others, possessed renewal dates. I instructed Ben to prepare non-renewal notices for their land leases, affording them the legally stipulated period to vacate the properties. They owned their houses, the physical structures, and I extended fair market offers to purchase these structures through Neighborhood Renewal Group. They could accept the offer, or they could undertake the rather intricate and costly procedure of physically relocating their houses off my land. Karen, predictably, declined the initial offer for her McMansion. She threatened legal action, injunctions, and eternal retribution. Ben managed her lawyer with professional aplomb. The law was unambiguous. She owned the house, I owned the land. Her entitlement to keep her house on my land was expiring. Nodder, surprisingly, accepted the offer for his much more modest residence almost immediately. He appeared relieved to be free from Karen's dominance and the entire predicament. Sugar, who had never truly been problematic and had, in fact, displayed some fortitude at the end, had her lease renewed without complication. She later informed me she was contemplating running for the new, reformed HOA board. The few other residents who had been part of Karen's inner circle of collaborators also received non-renewal notices for their land leases and buyout offers for their homes. Most accepted the deals, grumbling but ultimately acknowledging that the situation was resolved. As for Karen, after months of bluster and legal threats that proved fruitless, she finally conceded and sold her house to my LLC for a price slightly below my initial generous offer, primarily due to her lawyer's fees diminishing her potential profit. The day she departed in her Escalade, its Karen 1 plates now appearing rather dejected, was a day of quiet rejoicing for many in Willow Creek Estates. I did not observe her departure. I had no need to. My point had been established. The neighborhood transformed thereafter. I collaborated with the remaining residents to institute a new, streamlined HOA. We eliminated the absurd regulations, retaining only those that were sensible for preserving property values and general decorum. The fees were actually reduced as we curtailed the profligate spending Karen had engaged in, such as the excessively ornate holiday decorations that only she appeared to desire. The ambience grew lighter, more convivial. People began conversing with one another again, no longer apprehensive about being reported for some fictitious transgression. I eventually sold the houses Neighborhood Renewal Group had acquired, one by one, to new families, ensuring they understood and were comfortable with the reformed HOA structure and the land lease arrangement, which I made certain was equitable and transparent. I even sold Willow Creek Holdings LLC itself approximately 2 years later to a responsible, long-term property management company committed to upholding the fair system we had implemented, thereby realizing a tidy profit on the entire undertaking. My too many cars predicament had culminated in my purchasing a neighborhood, ousting a tyrant, reforming a community, and achieving a respectable return on investment. Not unsatisfactory for an individual who merely wished to work on his old pickup in peace. Occasionally, the most preposterous difficulties necessitate the most thorough resolutions. And let me assure you, the peace and quiet in my own driveway these days is invaluable. No Karens in sight, just the gentle purr of a finely tuned engine and the gratifying awareness that sometimes, just sometimes, the ordinary person with a bit of expertise and a great deal of patience can indeed move mountains or, in this instance, acquire the land beneath them.